Welcome to the Good Grief Conversation. I'm your host, Janet Jones, and you're listening to UK Health Radio. This programme brings you honest, gritty, emotional and inspiring conversation around a subject that affects all of us, yet is still very much taboo. So join me now for this inspiring Good Grief Conversation. Welcome to the Good Grief Conversation once again. This week we are on week 3 of our Spiritual Help Collection, and it is time to dive even deeper to understanding what has happened to the mind, the body and the spirit during times of grief. You see, there is no timescale to grief, and grief, unless worked through, will remain unresolved grief, and forever it will show up and affect your life in ways that you just can't imagine, from affecting your physical body to your emotional reactions in life, having all kinds of knock-on effects in your relationships and how you show up each day, your relationship with yourself, your whole thought process. And this is insidious and affects your life. So unresolved grief it's everywhere really, and we need to start looking at things. Now, sometimes it takes courage to really look at grief in its face, but when we do, then we can transition into a more joyful and peaceful life. And I hope you've been joining me on this journey and you are starting to see some progress in how your life is becoming. So today's guest is a really interesting author. She has written 10 books and she's an Amazon #1 bestseller, and her latest book is called Reading the Soul. And she sent a copy of this book to me recently, and that piqued my curiosity as to how is the soul affected at times of grief, and how do we look at it and how do we heal it? So that's what Catherine and I are discussing in this conversation. So take a seat, grab a cup of tea and listen in and enjoy. And I'll speak to you later. Catherine, thank you very much for joining me on the Good Grief Conversation today. We've got some interesting conversation to have.
Thank you so much for having me, Janet Jones, and thank you everyone out there for listening. And my hope is that by listening, we give you a lot of inspiration and hope, and hopefully enlighten your soul so that you feel uplifted by what we have to say today.
Well, that's a great goal. I think also the goal is helping with that information to helping us find a happier place of peace, and then build the strength to do the next bit of life. Because once you have grief in your life, it's based on loss, not only the loss of a loved one, but all kinds of losses. And that affects the energies that we have. So one of those is also our soul energy. Now, I'm very new to this, but I do feel that my soul is wounded, but I would not have the language to explain that, but I feel that. So maybe you can explain a little bit more why that would be.
Okay. Well, first of all, let me kind of give you an overview about how I look at a human being. So I am a medical intuitive healer. And when I do my work, I work on what I refer to as the 5 levels of the being. So you have a physical body, you know what that is, your bones, your organs, your muscles, your hair, right? The parts that can be measured. And I have great respect for medical doctors. My brother's a doctor, my dad's a doctor, my grandfather was a doctor, my great-grandfather was a doctor, and my uncle was a doctor. So we love our doctors, and they're the kinds of people that you can go to when you want to measure what's happening on the physical level. Then you have an energy system, and your energy system includes your chakras, your acupuncture system, and the breath. Okay. And one of my 10 books that I'm giving away right now is called The Little Book of Breath Work. And during the coronavirus pandemic, I've given it away to people in 13 different countries to help people cope with coronavirus and the anxiety surrounding that. So if you're listening to this broadcast and you want a free copy of the Little Book of Breathwork, just send me an email at Catherine@CatherineCarrigan.com. Ask me and I'll send you the Little Book of Breathwork.
What we could do, if you like, is put that into my podcast extras, and then anyone who's listening to this can just have access to that, and they've got that the whole time then. So we can make that a nice gift for our listeners, which would be great.
And then you have the emotional body, which is the largest part of anyone, all right?
Right.
You know, emotions can shut down any process. Then you have your mind, which is your thoughts and your beliefs. And then you are a soul. You're a soul having a physical experience on earth. Now, when you go through a devastating loss, whether it's the loss of a child or loss of a spouse, or even loss of a job, all right? Many times when we go through these huge losses, it definitely affects us emotionally. We know that, but it can also amount to what's called wounded spirit. Now, in my 10th book, Reading the Soul, I explain what I look for as a medical intuitive when I am doing a medical intuitive reading. So when I am doing a medical intuitive reading, I read all 5 levels of the being: physical, energetic, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And I also read what's going on the spiritual level. Now, part of the reason that I wrote my book is that there are many systems. If, for example, if you go to a medical doctor, they're going to have many systems that will allow them to assess what's happening on the physical level. Or if you go to an acupuncturist, they'll read your pulse. Or if you go to reading the energy system, or if you go to Reiki Master and the Reiki Master teacher, they can, use a pendulum and show you what's happening in your energy system. If you go to a psychologist, you can talk about your emotions. And you can go to like a coach or something and talk about what's going on in the mind. But up until my book, Reading the Soul, there's been really no system that helps people understand what is going on with my soul. So going back, when we suffer these huge losses, we can experience what's referred to as wounded spirit. Now, you have a wounded spirit when you suffered a wound that goes so deeply, it goes all the way and penetrates to the level of your soul. And I have 27 years experience in natural healing. And one of the things that I do is I do healing work at the soul level, and I can clear wounded spirit.
So let's talk more about what the soul is, and how did you, as an intuitive healer, what was it that brought you to that soul connection? So we can talk more about the soul and how it might get wounded.
Absolutely. All right. So first of all, when I do my work, again, I have a particular view of how I will look at a person, because what is your soul? The soul is the eternal part of you. Okay. It's the part of you beyond all space and time. It's the part of you that even when you lose your life in this lifetime, that soul carries on. And even when we have loved ones who've crossed over, you can go to someone like a medium or someone like myself and actually have communication with people who have passed over, right? Because your soul is eternal. For example, for myself, I was very, very close when I was younger with my grandmother. And after my grandmother passed away, literally the day she died, she appeared to me in my writing, and I heard her voice very, very clearly. And she spoke to me. I could tell you stories about things that my grandmother did even after she passed away.
What kind of things? What sort of
It
things
was
happened?
quite interesting, because I have to tell the story because it'll sort of make sense. So I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and one weekend I was down visiting my parents, and my parents were divorced at the time. And so when you have divorced parents, part of what you have to do as a child is, I'm going to spend time with my mother, then time with my dad, and then time with everybody else. So I was spending time with my father, and we were actually in church on a Sunday morning. And all of a sudden, I was overcome with grief. And I was crying so much that there was literally water on the floor of the church because I was crying so much. I was so overcome with grief. And I remember at the time thinking, why am I crying? Why am I so sad? Well, I'd been down visiting family, but in all the hullabub, I hadn't been able to go visit my grandmother, who was in a nursing home at that point. My grandfather had already passed away, and I live about 4 hours away in Atlanta. So anyway, there I am. I find myself weeping uncontrollably in a church, and I was very embarrassed. And, when church service is over, I thought, well, I need to drive back home to Atlanta, about 4 hours away, recollect myself and get back home. Well, as soon as I got back home, I brought out my journal and I was writing, and all of a sudden I heard my grandmother's voice. And she basically said, I will never leave you. I will be in your writing. Now, right about that time when I got home, I found out that my grandmother had just passed away. And she had just died, and my grief suddenly became understandable. That even though I was not physically present with her, I literally picked up that she was on the way out. By the time I got home, she had passed away. So I'm journaling, I said to her, please don't leave me. And she said, I love you more than life itself. And many of the relationships that we have, such as you with your son, we do love these people more than life itself. And the relationships that we have go on past our physical lifetime. I said, don't leave me. And she said, don't worry, I'll always be in your writing. And then the very next day, what was very, very funny, I was on my way back down to Savannah to prepare for the funeral. And at the time I was a playwright. I've written 12 plays, and I was on the way down to Savannah, and I got a call from a theater in New York City. And that Sunday, about the time my grandmother was dying and I'm communicating with her in my writing, there was somebody at the theater, and when you're a theater, people are always sending you plays. Please read my play, please publish my play, please perform my play. They're going through their plays to throw them out. They picked up my play by accident. They started reading my play and laughing uncontrollably. And the next day, I'm going down to Savannah for my grandmother's funeral. I got a call from the theater, and they said, we want to produce your play. That was my first production in New York City. And I turned to a friend of mine and I said, my grandmother works fast.
That's quite uncanny timing, isn't it?
Going back to your question, what is the soul? It's the part of you that's eternal, and the part of other people that's eternal, and the part that we can continue to have a relationship with beyond all space and time.
And how do you have that relationship? Like for my son, I talk to him all the time. I write letters, but I don't know. Do I get things back? I don't know. I get voices in my head, but is that me? So from my side of the fence, I'm like, how much of this am I actually making up? I don't know how much is true.
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, how you communicate with that person. Again, you call on their name. You do exactly what, like you mentioned, you write letters to that person, you pray to that person, but you can work with a highly trained person who's psychic or intuitive, such as a medium. I'm not a medium per se. I'm not a professional medium, but I've definitely communicated with many people who have passed over. But you can communicate through a medium who's someone who's trained to be a channel for people who have passed over, right? Again, a real simple thing that you can do is to ask that person for a sign. One of my 10 books is called Unlimited Intuition Now, and it's about the 4 different kinds of intuition and how you can develop them. And one of the kinds of intuition is clairaudience, which is psychic hearing. You can hear the voice that's not spoken, right? And because it comes in so fast, it's easy to confuse that with your own thoughts. But if you're confused, part of what you can do is ask clarifying questions, right? For example, if I was speaking to my grandmother, I would say, Mamie, which is what I called her, can you let me know that it's really you? So you may see something, you may hear something, you may see an image that only you would know. For example, like there have been times in my life when I saw my grandfather. Well, when I saw him in my mind's eye, he was wearing a shirt that I'd given him for one of his birthdays, right? And so I had a very distinct image with him. We just have to trust that those of us who have lost people who are dear to us, those people who love you, their love persists beyond all space and time.
I'm right. In the early days, I had a lot of connection with Murray. And I was very confident that it was him and his spirit, without a doubt. Like time has moved on now, and I don't feel that same closeness or that the same heightened connection. And so is there something that you can do to heighten that connection? Because I'm very jealous of people when they say that they've seen their loved one. I'm like, oh, but I want to see my loved one. Is there anything we can do?
That's a great question. And I fully believe that everything that happens to us is for our highest good. And also everything that doesn't happen to us is for our highest good. So I also believe that if we're spending too much time dwelling on our loved one who we have lost and not enough time engaging in our life, our loved one may step back a little bit. Again, you could even ask clarifying questions like, is it in my highest best interest for us to continue to communicate? Or is it in my highest best interest for me to shift my focus and move on in my life? But working with a professional medium, you can, and there are people like this who this is what they do, is help people to communicate. But usually the mediums will tell you that the first 6 months after someone has passed over, there's usually not a lot of communication at that time. It's almost like the person's soul needs to settle. But I have definitely had communication with loved ones passed over. Probably one of the most interesting ones is I had a dog who I was very, very close to. She was a rescue girl. She had been in 2 pet rescues before she became my puppy. And she's definitely around me. There's no question. I feel her. I see her. If you go to CatherineCarrigan.com, I have on the left side, there's different buttons, but I have photographs of actual angels. And lots of people go, yeah, right. You've got pictures of angels. And then you go look and it's like, oh my God, there's an angel. Well, a number of my angel photos were taken with my dog in the photo. She was a very special dog. Even while she was alive, at the end of her life, she lost her eyesight. And there were times when she would get away from me in the dark and people would rescue her. She would be running out into the street and I wouldn't even know it. And people would stop their car and bring her back. She was absolutely surrounded by angels. And there's photographs that I have of my dog surrounded by angels. So this connection that we have can include, pets that we've been very close to as well.
And I guess that's the thing, isn't it? Because the soul isn't, I would imagine, exclusive to human beings. I mean, presumably all life has a soul, from a tiny insect to whatever, a gorilla.
Yes, absolutely. So in my book, Reading the Soul, I talk about what's going on with your soul and what I look for when I'm doing a medical intuitive reading. Now, the reason that's so important regarding your health is that your soul controls your mind. Your thoughts and beliefs control your emotions. Your emotions control your energy, and your energy system controls what's happening in the physical body. By the time you experience dis-ease or illness, the imbalance has been in your energy field for some time.
That makes absolute perfect sense, yes.
Yeah, so the soul level is the most powerful level to work on because you are a soul having a human experience. And this is why so many people who come to me, I'm like a little detective. They work really hard and their health is not improving, or they don't understand what's going on, or they've been to all the doctors and the doctors can't figure it out. Well, it's because nobody's looking at all the levels, right? And I do find things on the physical as well. Wounded spirit is a really big deal. Let's talk about something, and I like to be positive, but let's talk about will to live. So sometimes we have suffered a loss, whether again, it's a loss of a loved one or loss of a job or, loss of money or loss of self-esteem, and we lose our will to live. So what is your will to live? It's the drive to keep living. And when people lose their will to live, they can become suicidal. This is one of the things that's happening when people become suicidal. Now, we're all going to die. You, me, us health nuts, the people who eat Doritos every day and don't exercise, we're all going to die. So when you want to commit suicide, you're just hurrying up the process. What happens before people commit suicide is they lose their will to live. And that's one of the things I look for, is how strong is your will to live? Because when you have a strong will to live, and when you reconnect with your purpose, you develop the strength, you find the strength inside of yourself to keep going. So just like you, Janet Jones, you experienced a tremendous soul-wrenching loss when you lost your son. But you found new purpose in helping people deal with their grief. And this is a big deal, especially now during the coronavirus in the United States. I believe they say over the past 3 months, more people have died than in any other point in US history. Yeah, more people die of the coronavirus every day than died every day during World War II. And at this point, over 160,000 people have died from coronavirus. And this is 3 times the amount of people that we lost in the Vietnam War. At any rate, so again, we're talking about tremendous loss of life, loss of jobs, loss of money. So dealing with grief is very important, and you have found a new purpose by helping people learn how to cope, right?
Yes, I hope so. I hope people listening are really taking away some very valuable information that will touch them. I know that, there isn't one size fits all in any of this, which is why I like to have a variety of conversations, just so that we can all learn together the depth of being human. Because what I have discovered through grief, and certainly through, this extensive grief, you actually learn so much about yourself. It's almost like you lose yourself and then you meet yourself. I certainly feel I'm a very, very different person than I was before. I'm yet to discover who this person is. I don't know me anymore, but I'm certainly going to get to know myself. That's why when you connected with me about the soul and coming on the Good Grief conversation, I thought this is the perfect opportunity to learn about that part of us. We stay, like you say, on the physical. We understand about the emotional. With loss, you get heartbreak, and it really does affect your heart. It's amazing. I had a Reiki session the other day, and I'm sure you'll understand this because you do Reiki. This girl who's a Reiki master, she had tuning forks. And so she was using the tuning forks around my body, my feet, my legs, all the chakras. And then she put it on my heart chakra. And I started to cry, like my body just cried. And I found that so incredibly powerful. And I thought, there is the evidence that we are more than what we think. We really are this energy field in a way. And like I say, I'm a newbie. I'm just investigating all this stuff. That's why I speak to people like yourself. So how is that energy field linked with our soul? Or is it the same thing?
Great question. It is actually the same thing. If you're listening to this podcast, one of the things you need to know is that if you've experienced some of these profound griefs, you actually do have a wounded spirit. But just like you can cut your finger and it can heal, or you can have cancer and you can heal from that. Part of the message I want to give your audience today, Janet Jones, is that you can heal from wounded spirit. And the first step is to realize that you have a wounded spirit. In my work, I have 27 years of experience as a medical intuitive healer, and I clear wounded spirit. And some of the techniques that I use are actually very, very simple. But the first step is you have to acknowledge that you have a wounded spirit. The wounded spirit may affect every acupuncture meridian in your body. So having a broken heart is very, very common. That's another aspect. And I also talk about that in Reading the Soul, because your heart can either be open or closed, okay, energetically, because you asked about energy. And when our heart is open, we're able to receive love and give love. When your heart is closed, you're shutting down to all the love that's available, that's around you. And part of the reason that I share photographs of angels on my website, CatherineCarrigan.com, is that in my experience, if you're listening, you are actually surrounded by angels 24/7. There's not a single second of any day of your life that you don't have this angelic presence around you. And it's really just a question of whether you learn to communicate with them. So just like you asked me about communicating with beings who passed over, such as your son or my grandmother or my dog, you can also learn how to communicate with your angels. And I teach people how to talk to your angels, because when you realize the divine presence that's here to support you, that is supporting you all the time, then it helps you to overcome some of the loneliness and helps you to find your way.
Yeah, I can understand that. Can you give us an example of how someone might communicate with angels? Just like you've given the examples here about, is it in my highest best interest? How do you communicate with angels? How do you bring them in? And there's so many of them. How do you choose one?
All are great questions. I begin every day with prayer and meditation. And I do that very consciously, just like if you were an athlete, you would work out or exercise in order to do what you do. Having a prayer and meditation practice is part of my work as a medical intuitive healer, because I intentionally set my vibration as high as possible at the beginning of every day. I also set my intention at the beginning of every day to serve God for the highest good, to be a light of God's love wherever I am. Now that's just me, but you can do the same thing, right? Why is it so important to have a practice of prayer and meditation? Because you can't listen and you can't hear if you're constantly busy and not taking time. So first of all, I encourage you to have a practice of prayer and meditation so that you have a connection to your own soul and a connection to the higher power, which I refer to as God. And a real simple way to communicate with your angels, and it's one that I frequently practice, is this. What I find is if I'm not taking the time during the day to listen to my soul guidance and listen to my angels, they'll frequently wake me up in the middle of the night. So middle of the night is actually a perfect time to communicate with your angels, because the phone is not ringing, the children aren't asking for food or attention, your spouse isn't bothering you, the news isn't on, it's just quiet. And so you get out your journal, and everyone has a guardian angel. So what is your guardian angel? Your guardian angel is a spiritual guide who's been with you your entire life. So sometimes I'll just get out my journal. Let's say I wake up and I'll write at the top of the page, guardian angel says. And then I'll just start channeling. I'll just start writing what I'm hearing. A lot of times I don't even stop to read it at that time. And I'll write down what my angel has to say to me. And then it's very interesting, because if you have trouble sleeping, which is really common, I think, after people have significant losses, you have to realize that, even if you've lost your loved one, your angels have never left your side, not for one moment. So you can listen to this guidance, write it down, And what I find is once I write down what my angel says, I can go back to sleep. It's like I hear and get the message, I shut my journal, boom, I'm back asleep. And then the next day I go back and read what they have to say. A lot of the messages that you get from your angels, first of all, if it's actually an angel, it's never scary. There's never a time an angel will scare you. They'll always be uplifting and encouraging. They'll point you to the right path. If you're someone who guides other people, frequently they will give you messages for other people. Like I'll remember one time I got woken up in the middle of the night and it was a message for one of my clients. And it was somebody who had worked with me for many years. So I was able to call them up and say, hey, I got a message from my angel for you last night. And she was like, thanks, I appreciate that. But that's a real simple way to start listening to your angels. But there's many, many other techniques. And in my book, Unlimited Intuition Now, I talk about some of these other techniques too.
That's brilliant. That's a good way we can start that, that process off. So what is it about prayer then? You talk about raising your vibration and you say you start with your prayer practice. What is it about prayer that does that? And how do you feel before you practice and after you practice?
Well, first of all, the moment I open my eyes, I start praying. We all have habits. So let's kind of go back for a moment because I'm a healer. All illness is slowed down vibration. Now, you've had that experience. If you've ever had a cold, you know how when you have a cold, it's like you can barely get off the couch? That's slowed down vibration. Or if you go to a nursing home, time slows down. You'll be there like, oh my God, we've only been here 10 minutes and it feels like 2 hours. So illness is slow down vibration. Healing happens when you lift your vibration. And when you set your intention to connect with divine source energy and to serve for the highest good of all, then you allow that high vibration energy to flow through you. And then when that happens, you experience lots and lots of energy. One of my books is called Unlimited Energy Now, and I talk again about the 5 levels, including the spiritual. But you're basically uplifted because you are allowing divine energy to serve through you.
Yes, I understand that. Whereas when you try to do it the other way round, I hate the word, it's exhausting.
Exhausting.
But it's like the ego is trying to do that. Like, I've got this, right, if I just do this and if I just do that. But from what I'm picking up in this conversation is that's a really small thing to do, that we don't have what it takes really to heal, from that level.
Well, this is what I have to say. I had 27 years of experience. I was Phi Beta Kappa at a Ivy League college. I'm the author of 10 books, and I'm here to tell you I don't know anything. And when I do a medical intuitive reading, I'm literally doing that. I'm reading the person. So just like if I pick up a book I've never read, I'm like, oh, this is what the words say. I'm reading my book, Reading the Soul. If the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, it will be enough. Meister Eckhart. So when you're reading, you get your ego out of the way and you allow, again, what needs to be presented to be shown to you.
So you just have to sit and wait then. So for somebody who decides, right, I'm going to now look at healing my soul. I mean, obviously they can read all your books and they can get in touch, but the very first thing, would you say, is to get out of your own way and open yourself up to listen as opposed to try and do?
Yes, absolutely. And I talk a lot about how in my work, my job is to show up and get out of the way. And what I mean by that is to be fully present, but allow my ego mind to get out of the way so that my soul can communicate with your soul and your soul can communicate with me everything that I need to know about you, whether it's the functioning of your digestive system or the fact that you've got a chakra closed or that you've got this unresolved emotional trauma from your childhood, or that you're holding this belief, or that this or that is going on with your soul, whether it's a karmic contract or a wounded spirit or negative spiritual energy or anything else. when you set your ego mind out of the way, you set aside everything that you think you know and allow what needs to be presented to you to show up. And of course, this is a practice. In my book, Unlimited Intuition Now, I talk again about the 4 different kinds of soul guidance: claircognizance, clairaudience, clairsentience, and clairvoyance. And part of what you have to do as a person is understand how your soul communicates with you. Because when you understand how your soul communicates with you, then you're not second guessing yourself. So for example, if you're a mother of more than one child and you hear a voice, you don't go, this is Susie, when it's really Johnny. You know who's talking to you.
Do we get to know our soul through meditation? That's the being quiet and listening.
One of the things I talk about in my book, Reading the Soul, is what is your soul longing and what soul medicine works best for you. Now, here we are, we're talking about grief in this show. And, just as if you have a cold, you might take echinacea or vitamin C or chicken soup. Okay, when you've experienced a wounded spirit, part of what you need to look at is what medicine does my soul need? So let me give you some examples of soul medicine. Laughter, hugs, spiritual community, which is like-minded people, nature, fresh air, sunshine, singing, writing, being of service, forgiveness, playing with children.
Well, I've done all of those, actually. Amazing that you're doing this list, and I'm going through in my head going, yeah. Oh yeah, I've done all of that. In fact, I had a really beautiful experience with my friend's little boy. So it would have been last year. He would have been, I don't know, 1 and 2 or 3 months, something like that. And he was very clingy to his mom. He didn't like to go to other people. And we were in a cafe. And as we were leaving the cafe, he'd only just started to walk. And he walked up to me and he grabbed my hand. And straight away, my friend starts taking photos. She said, he's never, ever done that. Even at the time, I thought, this is a deeper connection. This isn't just a little boy taking anyone's hand. This is a deeper connection. I felt it. Within my energy, I felt that. I know you'll understand that. So yeah, really powerful.
Right. So part of what I do when I actually do clearing work to clear wounded spirit, but then I'll look at, what soul medicine does this person need? And when you give yourself permission to do that, watching funny movies, etc. I mean, there's a long list, right? And then another thing that's really important for us to pay attention to is what I refer to as your soul longing. So let's say you have a soul longing to, in my case, write books, right? My whole life, all I wanted to do was write books. Now I've published 10 books. We have to really pay attention to that. And an example that I give is in 2018, I kept getting guidance that I needed to write a book about breathing. Well, my ego kept arguing with myself. Who wants to read a book about breathing? Who needs to read a book about breathing? Well, my soul kept persisting, and your soul will persist gently. Your soul is going to keep bugging you about, the direction that it needs you to take until you actually listen. I always say God only has to hit you over the head when you're not paying attention. So finally I was like, okay, I give up. I'm gonna write this book, The Little Book of Breath Work, breathing exercises, hand mudras, and affirmations. I finished it in March 2019. March 2020, we're having a global pandemic that affects your lungs. And as soon as I finished the book, I was like, okay, I get it now. Most books about breathing are academic. This is friendly. It has a technique in it that'll cut your anxiety in half in 8 minutes. Drugs don't work that fast. There's a lot of stuff that didn't work that fast. And techniques that help people breathe if and when you or one of your loved ones should get sick. So we have to pay attention to our soul longing. And when you follow that soul longing, you're going to get really uplifted. So a funny story about soul longing. I went to a writer's conference in March 2019 to finish the book. Right before I went, all this stuff happened. Someone smashed my mailbox. Both of my websites crashed. My accountant made a whole bunch of mistakes. there was all this stuff that happened, and I had to drop everything and fix all these problems. So when I showed up at the writers' conference, I was completely exhausted. And I was like, oh, I'm so tired. I don't know how I'm going to write this book. But here I am. Now I need to finish it because I'd written a lot already. And by writing my book, by allowing my soul to work through me, by the end of 3 days of writing nonstop for about 10 hours a day, I felt like I'd been at a spa. And when you listen to your soul and do what you're guided to do, you are going to be uplifted.
That sounds really great. That's fantastic. There is so much in this conversation. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back and set up my morning practice, because the mornings I find the most difficult part of the day. And I guess that's because the body is coming into different energies after the energy of being asleep. Then there's the wake up. Then there's the realization that, you know, life is still as it was when I went to sleep. And it just takes a while to get out of bed and physically doing something. But now I see that the missing link is to have the practice and then get out of bed and get on and do something. Thank you for that gift for me today. Catherine, it's been an absolute delight to speak with you. We will put the breathing book into the podcast extras for our listeners. And within there also, I'll make sure that there are links to all of your books. We'll put a list of the books that you've written, because I think they're all, just this conversation, you can see how they all link. I think that's a really lovely collection. So we'll make sure that those are in the podcast extras too. So thank you so much for your time, Catherine. It's been an absolute delight. Thank you so much.
And just remember, if you recognize that you are suffering from a wounded spirit, you can heal from that. You have to figure it out, just like if you have some other illness, you have to figure out what that you need to get better, but you can heal from wounded spirit.
You can. And that's a really wonderful thing to know. And I love your list of where you put the 5 stages, and that actually it's the spirit is the best place to start, really, and then take the journeys in all the other steps. So really valuable. Thanks ever so much, Catherine. Thank you. Certainly, after speaking with Catherine, I'm feeling a little more aware of myself and aware of the responsibility that I have to myself, and that I want to find the joy in my life too. And I hope that you are feeling the same way. I hope that is what you got from our conversation. And, you know, it's always really great to hear from you and to find out what you're getting from these conversations. So if you wish to get in touch, then my email is janet@thegoodgriefconversation.com. And also, if there's anything that you're struggling with, then do get in touch, because, you know, it's my job to go and find the people out there who have the answers for you. So do drop me a line. And if there's any way that you feel I can help you, then, you know, do not hesitate to get in touch. Also, Catherine has created a very special gift for you, and that is over in the podcast extras, and it is to help with the willingness to start letting go of the grief, whether it's the grief of the loss of a loved one, a job, a relationship. You know, we are suffering grief all throughout our life. It is part of life. But what we don't want it to do is to take us down, because there is good in grief. So if you would like to access Catherine's gift, then go over to podcast extras at thegoodgriefconversation.com. Just click on the yellow button that says podcast extras and sign up. If you also wish to support this program and my broadcast, then I also give you the opportunity to do that, either for the price of a paperback book or the price of a hardback book. However, the information is also available for free. It's just, it would be really nice to have your support, and it is always, always appreciated to keep this conversation going. So, in the meantime, I am your guest, Janet Jones, here on UK Health Radio. And until next time, you stay safe and take really great care of yourself. I'll see you next week. Bye for now.